Welcome to another episode of Financial Minds Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Jaime Agostino. I'm joined today by our dynamic duo, Tim Sustak and Scott Wood with Vizzo Financial. We are here today to discuss their thoughts on the next FOMC meeting. But before we get there, I feel like, I know you know these two. If you've been joining us for I'm going with years now. You've seen these two repeatedly on the podcast to talk about the FOMC, but let's get just one little chance. I'm going to challenge you and ask you just a personal question just to get to know you a little bit better. So our team can, or our listeners can get to know you as well. So I'm going to think of a random question. You guys are going to be like, what the heck, Jaime, are you doing? But let's see here. How do you like your eggs? I am an over easy girl with toast. What about you guys?
Well, I guess I can go. I like to make omelets. And I don't love egg yolks, so I usually do like a 2-to-1 ratio to whites to yolks kind of thing. But yeah, I like a good egg, and I like a good egg white omelet too. But yeah, I tend to go omelets.
Okay. Tim, what about you?
For breakfast, I like them over easy or scrambled.
Okay.
But my favorite way to eat the egg is a deviled egg.
Ooh, yeah, I love deviled eggs.
That's my least favorite way. I know a lot of people like them. I absolutely dislike deviled eggs
Well,
tremendously, and I don't know why. It's just not my thing.
see, I do like deviled eggs. I'm more of the, I like the classic deviled egg, but I see people they're doing fried deviled eggs. I don't know, Tim, have you seen that where like they fry the egg white piece and then they put the yellow yolk part on top of the fried egg? I've seen
No,
that.
I've not seen that.
Somebody told me they smoke their deviled eggs, so I've seen that.
Hmm.
I've seen them top with different things, shrimp and bacon, all kinds of different things. So people go uh crazy with their deviled eggs a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess we should talk about what we're really here for to talk about. So, Scott, I'll kick it off with you. As we head into the upcoming FOMC meeting, what's the overall economic story you're watching right now?
Well, I think the overall economic story or theme is that the consumer has continued to hold up despite everything. Tim and I and others in the firm, we've had a lot of discussions about this. How is the consumer continuing to do well? Because we've heard about these paycheck to paycheck people for years now, really since the pandemic and COVID and everything. And it's only gotten worse, it feels like. Things have gotten more expensive. The lower income brackets have gotten lower pay raises where they're actually for a while we were all getting average pay raises are above the pace of inflation, so that's a positive thing. But for the lower rungs on the income, they actually have not been keeping pace with inflation here for the last few months. So it's concerning. They somehow continue to do it. We are seeing increases in some credit card defaults and auto loan defaults. So we're seeing those things have increased, but kind of stabilized. But really, it's being driven by the subprime borrowers so far. Those are the folks that have had the issues. So it hasn't really pushed into the prime level yet. So that would be a concern, obviously, if we start to see some issues there. But I think the resilient consumer has been the big story. Obviously, inflation has been climbing. The Iran war has not helped. What I'll say is the Iran war is the wild card here. It's escalated recently. If we somehow were able to get a resolution there, and I think we've talked about this before, and the impact on oil prices would be tremendous, right? If the conflict ends, oil prices drop a lot. The economy in the U.S. has been humming very well. We've been doing, despite all the issues, we've been doing very well still. Um, so I guess that's the wild card is the oil prices directly related to the war. But if we get a resolution there, then things are going to be pretty good. But inflation continues to be the top concern for the Fed, and their dual mandate. So those are some of the things that are going on right now.
All right. So, Tim, big question. What do you expect the Fed to do at the meeting and why?
Yeah, I expect no change for a number of reasons. I think, one is what Scott just got finished talking about. The consumer has been resilient. I think that's, you know, uh, certainly come from the jobs picture. I mean, certainly that has slowed down, but it's still stable, right? Unemployment's been fairly stable, and that um, along with the divided Fed that we know is out there based on the last SEP. I think they're certainly going to watch, wait and watch. Like Scott said, the wild card is the Iran war. That's certainly pushing around inflation numbers, and who knows what's going to come out of that. But I think the other big thing too is, with Chairman Warsh coming in and him wanting to kind of dissect everything around the methodology by which they conduct monetary policy. They've got the task forces out there. I think he's going to want to see some results out of those task forces and kind of develop a new methodology, if you will, if warranted, about the way the FOMC conducts its monetary policy. And not to say that they won't move if they feel that they have to, but I think he'd prefer to kind of get some of those results in his hip pocket before they would make a move. So I think they're going to wait and watch for as long as they can here, unless forced to act. And I don't think, as Scott just got done talking about, I don't think there's anything out there that's forcing them to act at this point. So
Okay. So Scott, if you were the Fed chair, what concerns you the most right now?
That's a tough thing. I would never want to be the Fed chair. Let me just say that. I love economic talks about economics, discussions about it, but being the Fed chair, there's so much pressure there. And as Tim said, Warsh is brand new. He's had one meeting under his belt now. He's got a lot of task force set up to do these things. He's got a very divided Fed. Tim talked on all these things. So that's a big concern for him, is kind of an overhaul, so to speak, of the Fed. He's got, these 5 committees that he's looking to do,
Mhm.
get results by the end of the year and make these changes. And he's got a very divided Fed to do these things with. Half the Fed basically is far rate cuts right now, are holding rate steady, let's say, and then the other half is maybe for leaning more towards rate increases. But really, I think the big thing, if you look at their dual mandate, it's this employment versus, full employment versus stable prices, which is the inflation picture. So it has to be the inflation issue is what kind of concerns him the most right now. Warsh talked about this at the last meeting as kind of the area that is getting the most talk at the Fed. As Tim said, the employment situation has done very well. The unemployment rate actually dropped last month, partly driven by fewer participants in the labor market, but the unemployment rate has held up very steady this year. It's at the level where you would expect in a nicely functioning economy, which we do have. We have a nicely functioning economy with a lot of potential issues on the outside, as we talked about a little bit ago, with with some of the folks out there. But inflation is still center stage. Again, I don't want to harp on the Iran war, but that's kind of a big issue now. The other thing I'll mention is the tariff question, right, that we've kind of laid out there. So inflation is high. We're blaming it mostly on oil today, but we had a credit meeting yesterday and we were talking about this. Over 40% of companies in the US that have been hit with tariffs plan to increase prices over the next 6 months or so. So that's quite a few folks out there. Now, what the price increases will be, we'll have to see, but there is some impact from, that will come from that too. Now, that's a one-off kind of thing, right? Once those hit, it should be a one-time deal, but it just gives more credence to the inflation is the story right now. It's all about inflation. Months ago, last year, Tim and I think, we talked about it. The jobs picture and inflation were both kind of concerns, but the job situation has kind of straightened itself out, or it looks pretty good. So definitely inflation is the focus, and we'll have to see what happens in the Middle East.
Okay. So Tim, what economic data do you think is carrying the most weight in decisioning right now? Is it inflation, employment, consumer spending, or maybe something else?
no, I think obviously it's all important, but as Scott mentioned, it's inflation is the concern of the day. That is what they're watching, and you see that, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I think a lot of, at least some thought, uh, Chairman Warsh would come in and have a predisposition to want to make cases for lowering rates, but he came in and for some was surprisingly hawkish, saying, "Hey, look, we're gonna tackle inflation." It's not going to get away from us. So I made a semi-annual testimony to Congress, to the Senate Banking Committee, kind of reiterated that fact. And the Fed presidents that have been out there speaking, everybody's kind of on the same page. Whether you're in the camp of kind of waiting and watching, and you don't think rates will end up going anywhere, or whether you're one that thinks we're going to need rate increases, um, you know, pretty much without a fault, everybody out there is kind of saying, "Hey, inflation is what we're watching to see what happens there." And as Scott said, there's just so many wild cards, right? I mean, the Iran war is certainly the biggest out there. So we'll wait and see, but certainly it is inflation that is ruling the day.
Okay. All right. So, Scott, are there any economic indicators that aren't making headlines but deserve more attention?
Well, I mean, we have been hyper focused on those two main things, right, for the last, I don't know, year or two at least, as the Fed's been in this cycle. So we've been really focused on inflation and employment. Outside of that, I think some of the things that have, we talk about a little bit, but not a whole lot, is like consumer sentiment.
Mhm.
How do they feel about the economy? It's kind of a little bit of forward guidance there on what might happen based on consumer sentiment. And the positive news there is it had been going down. Most recently, consumer sentiment had been climbing higher. Um, but what I'll say is sentiment doesn't always align with actual numbers of what they do and what they actually do. So frequently we had some, what I'll say is that early this year we had some falling sentiment by consumers, but spending continued to be strong. Consumers continue to spend and do well. So I would say those are a couple areas to keep an eye on. How are people feeling about things? And then how is spending going? Are consumers still spending money? And the answer today is yes. Now we keep hearing about this bifurcated economy where the top 10 or 20% are responsible for 60% or more of spending.
Yeah.
And that's true, and it's out there and it's still happening. But I guess the bottom line is both groups are still spending. Um, but if we start to see the higher income people, if there's any slowdown at all there, so looking at the data for them, when they break the data up, if we start to see those people, those groups spending less, then that's where we should be concerned. But so far, we're not seeing that. And as I think about it, we have a lot of boomers retiring every day. There's thousands every day that are retiring. A lot of them are in pretty good shape. They've owned homes for years. They may have, some of them may still have pensions. They have strong 401ks, hopefully, because we've had really strong equity markets over their careers. And if they're retiring now, the markets are relatively strong too. So they can spend money, but it's more going to be service related versus goods related, and that's where we have seen the real inflation concern. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? They may keep spending, that group, but that may continue to drive service inflation up a little bit. So I would just say consumer sentiment and then look at the raw data, what they're actually spending. Does it continue to hold up?
All right. So, Tim, over the next few months, do you anticipate inflation to be higher, lower, about the same? And will unemployment move up or down? Thoughts?
Yeah, so you know, the honest answer is it's a toss-up, right? It's really hard to say, but I mean, what I would expect on the inflation front is I think we could see some higher inflation in the near term. I think mid to longer term, I think the Fed will certainly be diligent and make sure inflation stays under control. But some of the things we mentioned, I mean, I think could certainly put pressure. The Iran war does not seem to be going anywhere, right? We've kind of slipped out of that ceasefire. Now, last night, I understand we bombed some infrastructure. So, it does not appear that things are getting better there anyway. So that will continue to put, pressure on energy prices. And with each headline that comes out every day, those will fluctuate, right? Um, but I think the other thing that's very important is what Scott mentioned, and just to add a little color to that. And what he talked about was the fact that there may be still some tariff passed through to come. Um, and I was looking at an article before we came on. It's from Liberty Street Economics. New York Fed puts that out. And to Scott's point, of the firms that paid tariffs directly, 47%, at least this analysis, 47% of service firms say they're still planning on pushing tariff increases through and raising prices, and about 44% of manufacturers. So, um, I think, is that because tariffs are fluctuating, or is that just because they haven't passed through yet? I think probably a combination of both. But, to Scott's point, I think certainly we're going to see some more inflation pressure from tariff pass through, and then we're going to have kind of that gas on the, no pun intended, on the fire with the Iran war. And I think certainly in the near term we could see inflation rise. But overall, I think the Fed is committed to beating it, and I don't have any concerns there. As far as unemployment, I mean, I kind of think it's going to be steady as she goes. Um, I don't see much of it. I mean, obviously there could be, if something big happens, but given what we know now and what we've seen, I think we're in pretty good shape there, and it's going to be kind of steady as she goes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. Any final thoughts, Scott? Any final thoughts for our audience today?
I would just say the one thing for me that's very interesting and I want to see more. It's going to take time to see more about is just a new Fed chair.
Mhm.
He has really a lot of different ideas of what the Fed should be doing, and I agree with a lot of them. I think one of the main ones we saw a little bit at the last conference is forward guidance. He's not a big believer in giving a lot of forward guidance. He doesn't want to impact the markets in advance when the data or the situation could change, and they don't want to. He doesn't want to block the Fed into a corner where they've said that one thing, the economy changes in the other direction, and they're kind of pinned. He feels like that. So there's going to be less forward guidance. We saw in the dots plot. He did not give a dot last meeting. He excluded himself from being one of those, and then there was another member that didn't produce a long-term dot. And the dot is basically where they think, it's their projection of where they think rates are going to be year end. Um, so expect less of that. So what it means to me is there may be more reading between the tea leaves kind of thing where we have to pay more attention to what we see in the economy and maybe a little, well, I say a little less of what the Fed's saying, but they may not be saying much. So there's going to be less coming from the Fed going forward, more than likely. Um, and this may take a few months, but by this time next year, the dots plot, it may be a thing of the past. Who knows? We'll have to see. But in any event, there's going to be less information coming from the Fed. So we're going to have to get better at paying attention to all of the economic data and forming opinions on rates and things, and where we might be headed. So that's kind of one of the things that I find is pretty interesting here now, and bears watching.
All right. What about you, Tim? Any final thoughts?
No, I think just building on what Scott said, stay nimble, don't get married to any one outlook. And, it's a great time to be looking at the balance sheet from multiple scenarios and kind of having an idea what you do for, opposing scenarios. Don't get married to one path.
All right. Well, as always, thank you both so much for joining me. For our audience, don't forget to subscribe. Share your thoughts, and also stay tuned for Viso Financial's post-Fed meeting analysis with Tim with his FOMC update. And also special thanks to Viso Financial's 2026 Financial Conference for sponsoring today's episodes. The credit union space it's constantly changing, but our commitment to financial education and success never will. Join us September 16th and 18th at the Omni Grove Park Inn in Asheville, North Carolina for our largest event of the year, our financial conference. Get ready to dive into some of the biggest financial topics affecting credit unions today: interest rate and loan performance strategies, economic updates, investment and bond opportunities, stablecoin, and more, with sessions led by industry leaders and expert speakers. As always, this year's conference will also feature valuable opportunities for networking, a chance to earn those CPE credits, as well as new and returning activities. We've added a few additional activities this year. So Scott put the agenda together. I may throw in a couple activities. So we think it'll be a lot of fun and educational for everyone. So if you're interested in learning more about our 2026 financial conference, please visit Viso Financial's website at www.vfccu.org. As always, thanks for listening and make it a great day.